Hello, this is iPost Swords, and today I'm going to be talking to you about this, a Zeybek yatagan from the late 18th century which features an Ottoman blade. This example has a few features that are unique both among Ottoman blades and among specifically Zeybek swords. But before we get into what makes this sword unique, let's talk a little bit about its history. And that requires starting with who were the Zeybeks. The Zeybeks were an irregular militia force from the Aegean region of Turkey, which is on the western coast. In particular, this one is probably from around the region of the city of Ephesus. The Zeybeks, being a regular force, were mostly made out of infantrymen, which explains why they used a yataghan, which is primarily an infantry sword. Being an infantry sword, the yataghan is fairly short. This example is only 75 centimeters in overall length. This is rather comparable to other infantry swords of the Ottoman Empire at the time, such as the venerable pala. In a direct comparison to the pala that I own, it's only about 3 centimeters shorter in overall length. It is, however, also almost exactly the same weight. This yataghan weighs 670 grams, whereas this pala weighs 674 grams. These blades are also made of very comparable steels. This yataghan is made out of what is known as Turkish twist pattern welded steel. The Turkish ribbon twist that this one uses is particularly fine, being made out of very narrow bars of twisted steel. After being etched for contrast, it is visible that this extends all the way to the spine, a fairly unusual feature among any yataghan. Most of them have a monosteel spine and a monosteel edge. This one only has a monosteel edge, indicating that this was crafted by someone who was particularly skillful in the art of pattern welding. The reason these swords maintain a monosteel edge despite having a pattern welded body is because it allows for it to be a more homogeneous, stronger and harder edge backed by a tougher, non-homogeneous material. This blade, as mentioned, weighs almost exactly the same amount as the pala, but is however much narrower. This is because this has a very thick blade with minimal distal taper until the last half. At the base of this blade, it's around 8 mm thick, and it maintains that thickness all the way up to the halfway point of the blade, which begins to transition down into a more triangular section in the distal portion. As a result, this balances around 16 centimeters from the guard, or rather the lack of a guard, as yatagans do not have a true guard, instead having a bolster. This has what is known as a T-shaped hilt, featuring a horn T-shaped pommel. These are distinctive of the Zeybeks and differentiate them from Ottoman yatagans. However, the decoration on the bolster and here on the cladding of the tang indicate that this blade is of Ottoman manufacture, rather than being specifically for a Zeybek, as those are typified by having extremely minimal decoration. The blade is also decorated, featuring an inlay on this side with animalistic motifs featuring ram's horns, and also the name Hussein on the blade. On the obverse side, we can see a passage from the Quran, which names the 7 sleepers of the cave of Ephesus. The 7 sleepers of Ephesus hail from an old syraic legend, which has been adopted by both Christianity and Islam, being featured in their own chapter in the Quran. The 7 sleepers of Ephesus reportedly went into a cave around 250 CE and emerged 300 years later, having successfully escaped religious persecution. It's therefore a very important bit of mythology for the people of the Anatolian region, where Ephesus is located, which is both indicative of the production location of this sword, but also of the status that this sword may have enjoyed, being someone who was intimately connected to both the history of their region and to their religion. It also has one unmentioned, extremely unusual feature for an Ottoman blade. It is double fullered. I don't know how well you can see it in the light, but there are 2 fullers with a central ridge on this blade. It's a rather unusual feature to see on a yataghan. Most of them will have either a wedge cross section. This one instead features fullers, which further allow it to be light and stiff. Most Zeybek yataghans which have horn hilts feature extremely dark buffalo horn, But this one, which I've determined with the help of the people over at the Ethnographic Arms Forum, is more likely made out of boiled ram's horn. It was boiled in order to force the T shape. The reason we know it's not something like rhino horn, which also exhibits the distinctive translucency that this horn does, is because it does not have the right sort of structure, not being sufficiently fibrous. This ram's horn hilt echoes the ram's horn decoration that can be seen inlaid in silver on the blade. As I've mentioned, this fulfills a very similar sort of role as the pala, another popular Ottoman sword. Both the yatagan and pala are relatively light, relatively short infantry weapons. And this one is no exception. It falls right into the middle of the expected size and weight range that you'd see for an Ottoman yatagan or an Ottoman pala. Being similar in use case, they are also similar in form factor, despite curving in the opposite direction, and one having a slightly broader blade. Both feature reinforcing T-shaped spines, which help make the blades exceptionally stiff. It also allows them to be relatively light for their length. This sword lacks a guard. However, these were of course sidearms. Convenience was sometimes more important than hand protection. Despite being a mere sidearm, this is a highly decorated weapon, being made to an extremely high grade of manufacture. The twisted pattern welded blade, the decorated bolster, the decorated tang cover, and the use of a higher grade horn than is typical of these swords indicates that this would have been for a relatively wealthy Zeybek, perhaps an Efe, a chief among Zeybeks. The design philosophy of the yatagan is indicative of the way they were used. By having a recurved blade, you can concentrate more force on the point of percussion. It also allows you to perform a slight amount of a push and draw cut when doing a normal chop, as the bodily mechanics allow for the movement of the edge in a lateral direction as well as perpendicular to the flesh. This blade was therefore made for use. Its design and materials indicate that it was made capable of actually being used in battle, and as a result it is still actually very sharp. I have to be relatively careful when handling it. So not only is this a highly decorated and well-made sword, but it is also made with the intention of being used. I would posit that the large number of extra pins put into the hilt on this sword indicate that it was in fact used over time. And while the handle shows evidence of repair, the edge lacks any evidence of damage. This may be due to resharpening, or it may have simply been worn on campaign for a large amount of time without ever having been drawn in anger. This has been a quick video on a Zeybek yatagan with an Ottoman blade. I hope you've enjoyed the video, because that's all I've got for you today. Until next time, stay sharp.